and welcome to today's edition of the Evening Review. I'm Ashley Smith, the news editor of Namibian Sun. Let's take a look at today's headlines. And we joined live from Sweden, and it's Professor Henning Melber. We all know him very well as a very analytical person when it comes to politics. Professor, how are you this morning?
I'm fine, Ashley, so much. And while we are heading for autumn and winter, you hopefully soon can look forward to a bright spring with milder temperatures and more sun.
Yeah,
and
as
lots
we
of rain, I hope.
Of course. Professor, can we just jump right into it? The changing political terrain in Namibia. What are your views, and why do you think the ruling party should be a bit apprehensive?
I think the lights should have flickered already since late November with the results of the National Assembly and the elections. And rather while Hage Geingob tried to create the impression that they are giving it a thought and call it the year of introspection, and now had a special congress on introspection, I think Swapo has still internalized a toxic mindset which is equivalent to the arrogance of power. I took note of the comments which were published this morning in the Namibian Sun by the Secretary General Sophia Shaningwa, and even more so by Hilma Nikanor as the Secretary for Information. And they seem to totally misread the situation, which I ask myself why, if they look in a sober mind at the election results of late November. Then the writing is on the wall. And since then, the political opposition parties have been in reformation and strengthened actually their campaigns and their impact. And what Swapo did since then did not seriously appeal to trust and confidence that they are concerned and willing to regain credibility by more than just talking. They have to walk the talk, and that is hardly seen. It's absolutely absent. And I think it's a serious misjudgment to say Swapo will remain invincible, and that will happen again. Because let me return to the election results of late November. It was very clear that in the urban centers, Swapo even was losing an absolute majority in some of the voting districts. Now that was unheard of for 30 years. And that has not changed. I think it will be reinforced with Itula turning his movement into a party, and with the AR and Job Amupanda contesting Walfish Bay and Windhoek. Job is very clearly on the campaign trail since a year already when it comes to the mayor of Windhoek. Now, it's a secondary question if he achieves. What is very clear is those parties will garner considerable number of votes. The same most likely will apply to the LPM, especially in the Horab and even more so in the Karas regions. So I think already now they are represented in Dietmanshorp. It's very obvious that the regional and local situation will change with the elections that are coming, especially because you're not voting for this mystification of the liberation struggle. You are voting for individuals. And I think to be a candidate of Swapo these days turns out to be more a liability than a comparative advantage, because they have to show that they are persons of integrity, and that is not generally any longer the perception of Swapo. I follow the social media, and people are sick and tired of the talk. They want to see actions. And if you don't produce the actions, you don't regain the credibility you need to get the votes. So I think a lot of voters, if only out of frustration, would say this is payback time, especially because, if you vote for the opposition on a local or regional election, you power because they are having an absolute majority in the National Assembly. We still have a Swapo head of state. So it's easier to show your dissent on a local or regional election level. And I think Swapo is totally underestimating that situation, unless I'm totally wrong, which of course, but by reading the signs, I think they are up for a rude awakening.
Professor, just on that point of the Swapo vote being split essentially between the Affirmative Repositioning movement and the independent Patriots for Change, what opportunities does that present for other opposition parties?
Well, I think generally the shifting party landscape is a challenge which I hope is an incentive to consolidate democracy, because all those parties have to think twice. How do they position themselves? And it's very likely that we witness on some levels, municipal elections, a similar constellation as we could witness already during the last local elections in South Africa, where you don't have one party obtaining an absolute majority. And then the interesting question is, how do you approach other parties? What is your political ability and willingness to join governing alliances or opposing alliances? And I think for Windhoek and for Walvis Bay and maybe some other towns, there might be an interesting question, depending on the election result, who is willing to join whom to enter a government coalition, local governing coalition, which of course is also a question for Swapo, because Swapo is part of that situation. If Swapo manages in a municipality to get 40-45%, it's not good enough to govern. So then they also need to discuss, is there someone who is willing to join us as a partner to secure a majority when you take decisions on the local level? And that will be very interesting. And I sincerely hope that this is a new constellation which promotes democracy in the sense that people are willing to compare political party programs, to look at individual party representatives, which are important on the local level, and also to then make strategic decisions, not necessarily for these elections, but for elections to come, which party or political force you want to strengthen, even if it's not the dominant force, but to add a new flavor, a new input to something which is based on subject-related matters. And we have some of the parties who stress the subject-related matters. LPM, the name is a political Landless People's Movement, and it will appeal to a certain segment of the voters and not much beyond that. But that means they can make inroads, as we already have seen in November, to a certain part of the electorate, which considers more about the land issue and, let's say, restitution based on their own ethnicity or on their own historical trajectory, in contrast to others. I think Itula's party will appeal to the fractions inside of Swapo. And it will be very interesting to what extent that will play out in the regional and local elections. And I'm very curious to see how much he is garnering votes in the northern 4O regions. That will be a very interesting litmus test. And I don't know. I don't dare to make any predictions. I think this is still the regional stronghold of Swapo and also the Northeast. But it will be very interesting to see if in those regional elections, other parties, and in particular the Itula party, will actually draw votes which usually have been the traditional stronghold of Swapo. That will be interesting to see. And in the urban municipalities, it's very clear that in Walfish Bay and in Windhoek, the AR will make inroads based on, similar to the LPM, which focuses on the issue of land in a wider context, in a non-urban context. AR put urban land at the focus, and it appeals to a lot of people living under inhuman conditions as shack dwellers at the margins, at the outskirts, who are denied human dignity. One important thing, however, is, of course, what are the means of those parties to campaign, to transmit their information to the potential voters? So it's one thing to have a proper for a certain target group, but the other thing which remains a challenge is, do they have the means to reach the target groups? So to some extent, the question will be, when I stay with the AR as an example, are they able to reach out to the shack dwellers? It seems pretty obvious that they have sympathizers among the born-free generation, among the younger generation, but there is more to it. Elections are more than just a generational matter, despite the fact that it should be stressed that, of course, the new element in Namibian elections, like in South Africa, is the born-free element, that the number of those who have been born beyond apartheid, who were not the ones who have to show loyalty to Swapo because Swapo, as it claims, liberated the people. No, for them, Swapo didn't liberate them. So they will measure Swapo not on the basis of a heroic narrative or a patriotic history, unless their parents tell them to do so, but they have other criteria. And that will also, in a growing number, on the elections to come. So I'm very curious, not only as a political analyst, to see how the forces play out, because it might introduce a new chapter in Namibian democracy. And my sincere hope is that it won't produce a backlash towards anti-democratic tendencies by those political forces, and I do mean my own party, Swapo, who feel siege and then resort to other means instead of honoring and recognizing democracy. Because it's one thing to talk about democracy and pay respect to democracy if you are not afraid of votes. If, like in the last 30 years, you gain more and more and more votes until November last year, then it's very easy to pay lip service to democracy, because there's nothing you have to be afraid of. The moment democracy becomes what it really means, that you have political contestations and that others take away the votes, that others might join the decision-making process, maybe even take the majority from you, then it's crunch time. Then it's the time to show if you are truly democratic and respect fully the vote of the people. And that's something I also anxiously follow and wait for. And I truly hope that what we will witness in the near future will strengthen Namibian democracy, will entrench democratic behavior, and will also motivate people to make use of their democratic rights to freely express their opinion and cast their votes.
You mentioned coalition politics earlier, and we've seen in South Africa that has actually ended in tears in many local authorities and even in metros. In terms of coalitions, what is the benefit for voters at the end of the day?
I think it will sharpen again among the electorate the awareness that a political program matters, but beyond the political program, that how you are willing to implement it matters too. A political program is very nice. It can say everything. It can say the right things. And then you vote for the people, and then they couldn't care less to implement it. So that's exactly one of my Swapo is facing. I mean, they can continue every day, 24/7, that they are fighting corruption. And if you don't see that they are fighting corruption, you lose the confidence and trust. The same applies, of course, to coalition politics. If you vote for a specific party, you most likely, unless it's for personal loyalties, because it's your family or friends, you vote for a political program. And then your expectation is that those party representatives elected into offices implement the political program, or at least try to implement it. And that's where coalition politics comes into the picture. To what extent can you then bargain? To what extent can you influence the policy because you are a partner in a coalition government? And by doing so, to what extent can you give back the message that you deserved the vote? Very often the problem is in politics that those who are elected for political offices are just interested in the access to the honeypots. And that's not only something for a governing party, it's also something for the opposition parties. And we have seen changes in other African countries, not yet in Namibia, where the end result was that the newly elected government didn't behave much different from the old government. They were just greedy, they wanted to go to the droughts, they wanted to feed themselves, and they couldn't care less about the people who voted them into power. Now that would be the worst case scenario. And that is something parties also in Namibia and their representatives have to be fully aware of. Then just copy those you replace. And you just take over the seat, but you continue with the very same ruthless behavior. Then most likely the people say, so what's the use of that? Then rather the devil we know. And that will be one of the things which in coalition politics might play out, because you can contrast and compare more the different actors involved in the governing bodies.
Professor, you mentioned also earlier that you are still a Swapo member. What would you like to see the ruling party do in these few months ahead of the election to at least attempt to win back the trust of the electorate?
First of all, a complete moral and ethical revamp. They should stop these patriotic narratives. They should stop the nonsensical talks like the most recent one by Minister Peter Willow. This is not helpful at all. It's polarizing. It's dividing the situation. It's not looking into what are the value-based policies that cultivate good governance in the true meaning of the word. And they should be willing to apply consequences. No matter if this is a loyal cadre in the liberation history, if these people behave unethical, if they are greedy, if they are not willing to serve the interest of the ordinary people, they should get out of the picture. And I mean, that is something you have to do. If you're not serious about that, then you don't deserve the confidence and the support of the voters. So if Swapo is not seriously revising its moral and ethical framework, it does not deserve to stay in political power. And I say that as a Swapo member. We have never lived up to what we preached prior to independence. Our main slogan was solidarity, freedom, justice. And it's engraved. It's something I can't get out of my brain and heart. And if I apply it to the Namibian society today, I don't see solidarity. I see only very limited freedom, which is a good thing, but it's too limited. And I don't see justice beyond the rule of law in the sense of social justice. So basically, in the last 30 years, we have utterly failed. And we have not been punished so far until maybe to some extent late November last year. If we are not getting the act together, we deserve to be punished more.
Professor, speaking about integrity, in terms of the ballots being used in the upcoming election, will that add to people also accepting or being more open to saying this is a fair result compared to what happened with the EVMs?
I really hope so. First of all, it's a legal prerequisite. And I mean, there is actually no debate about it. This is what should happen. And I do believe that while it sounds old-fashioned or traditional, it's the best way to cast a ballot and a vote, where then also when counting the ballot papers, you have a high degree of control applicable. So I think it will encourage people to cast a vote, and it will encourage, I hope so, people to cast a vote according to what they feel, without being suspicious that it's controlled and they might be punished for it. But it also brings me to another point we haven't mentioned yet. In the build-up to the elections, voter registration will be a crucial element. So while we are talking, people need to keep in mind, and parties need to keep in mind, that they mobilize their supporters, or those they consider their supporters, to register their votes, that they are able to cast a vote. So the more people are registered to vote, and the more people are voting, making use of their right to vote, the more we have chances to get a vibrant democracy. And I think the paper ballot is a good way.
Just one final question for you, Professor, and that is around the Fishrot scandal, bribery scandal. What do you think is going to be the impact of that specific scandal on Swapo's vote in the upcoming elections?
I think it has already impacted seriously, because the way Swapo responded to the Fishrot was, again, very half-heartedly. And one can see, as much as I follow the social media out there, that people remain suspicious, that they are not giving Swapo the trust, that they are still believing that there is more to it than that we know, that the party might have directly benefited from the Fishrot scandal. The party has not been transparent and accountable enough to counteract that convincingly. And I think if they don't manage to do so in the very near future, they will not regain, that's part of the skeletons in the closet, they will not regain the trust they need to bring back people on board who started to think twice, and even more so after the November elections. You know, one of the weird things, President Geingob accused Al Jazeera to intervene into the Namibian elections by broadcasting this Fishrot documentary. Well, that documentary was broadcasted after the elections. And I mean, if there is a documentary which brings to the fore organized bribery and corruption bordering to state capture, that's not an interference in regime change or governance of a country. It brings to the fore what's wrong in the country. It documents the rot. And that's the blame game. Then to turn on the messenger and accuse the messenger to be the root cause is just showing they have not got the real problem and are not facing the challenge, because the challenge is to address the issue head on and deal with it. And things are that this has not been the case. And it's nice and sounds nice. No one is found guilty until proven so, until proven guilty. But that doesn't mean you are not closely investigating if there was a guilt. It's not postponing the engagement with the issue, and that is the tendency in Swapo. And it's not the first time, and I'm afraid it won't be the last time, and will come with a price attached. And I'm not talking about a material or financial price. I talk about the price losing the support of the people.
Exactly. And of course, Swapo is not the only formal liberation movement that has got these issues. And we also see it in South Africa with President Cyril Ramaphosa also now trying to address the rot in his party and the state capture. And the last NEC meeting actually came to a decision that when you're charged, you should actually be suspended from the party.
Absolutely. I mean, that's something where Ramaphosa, I think, scored a victory, where no one was really sure if that would happen. There were a lot of concerns ahead of the NEC that Ramaphosa might face a defeat. It was the opposite. What the NEC discussed and decided was actually a step in the right direction. Now it depends on the implementation. Now that's the next step, of course. They made a good, right decision, and now they have to show to the electorate that they are willing to implement it. And Ramaphosa faces an uphill battle. And of course, that's always the problem, and it applies to the Namibian situation too. Even if you make the right decisions, you will impact and affect the interests of quite a number of influential people, and it's another matter to then seriously implement it. And you don't only have to refer to South Africa. Watch what happened in Zimbabwe. And it's very obvious Mugabeism was not a system personified. It was personified by Mugabe, but not reduced to Mugabe. As much as state capture in South Africa cannot be personified, but not reduced to Jacob Zuma. It's a system which is organized on the level of the state. And Fishrot is the most worrying case, which seems to suggest that Namibia has reached a similar stage of state capture. And the party in power now needs to show that either this is not the case or that it's willing to. And that's the challenge.
Professor, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining us. It was a very interesting conversation. And please take care in Sweden and enjoy your day further.
All the best to you, Ashley, and all the best to all the viewers.
Thank you, Professor.
Dear invited guest, the Northern SME Expo team is aware of the current restrictions imposed on the country by Honorable President Hage Geingob as from the 12th of August 2020. However, We have developed a system that we can use while adhering to the new regulations. Our team will provide you with a ticket that contains details of the media launch as well as a timestamp at which your presence is required. As per new regulations, only 10 individuals will be present in the media hall as per timestamp indicated on the ticket. Thank you for understanding and for your cooperation. We are excited to see you on Friday. For any queries, please contact Nangula Nashandi on 081 4769 304.
This event is proudly brought to you by Chico Group of Companies.